This presentation was published as part of the Open Educational Resources Archive of the InclusiveGameLab. InclusiveGameLab is a project that was funded by the German Ministry of Research, Technology and Space and realized by the University of Applied Sciences Cologne and the Department for Youth Media Culture, North Rhine-Westphalia. Today we are going to talk about playtesting with disabled players. Playtests are a core part of every game development cycle. In order to ensure that your game is appealing, usable and enjoyable, you'll need players to give you feedback, ideally across multiple stages of development. What's too often neglected, however, is that games also need to be accessible, and the same applies to the playtesting process. If you don't make a conscious effort to include people with disabilities in your playtests, you will inevitably exclude many of them. This talk serves as a primer for playtesting with disabled players. Please note, though, that it does not offer a step-by-step instruction for how to conduct playtests in general. Instead, we will focus on what you have to consider specifically to make this process more inclusive. Before we start, it's important to stress again that no single player or even a group of players can speak for everyone. This is especially true for a target group as diverse as people with disabilities. Remember, not only are there many different kinds of disabilities, even within the same disability group, people's experiences, preferences and needs may vary widely. It's hence important to have as many people as possible, or more specifically, as time and budget allow, test your game to provide feedback. As is the case with any other playtest, the first step should be to clearly define your target audience and your screening criteria. Who should, in theory, be able to play and enjoy your game? Did you perhaps add design features or accessibility options for a specific group which need to be tested? Next, make sure that your game does not pose a known risk to certain player groups. Playtests should not be used to check for photosensitivity, epilepsy, motion sickness or phobia triggers, because these can cause severe harm. Instead, use tools to identify and remove the most pressing accessibility issues and make sure to mitigate risks. Once that's done, discuss when, where and how to conduct the playtests and start looking for suitable testers. There are a number of ways to find playtesters with disabilities. If you have the necessary budget and want to streamline the process, consider reaching out to professional playtesting services like Playtest Cloud and Player Research, or to charities like Able Gamers, to just name a few examples. These services will find players, conduct playtests, and deliver feedback based on your specifications. Another option is to reach out to dedicated online communities for gamers with disabilities, such as the Netzwerk Barrierefreies Gaming or the Disabled Gamers Discord. Next, you can share information about the playtests you're planning on social media and invite players to sign up. Good platforms to share such invitations are, for example, Reddit, Blue Sky, Mastodon, and Discord servers focused on gaming. And finally, perhaps you've already built a community for yourself. In this case, feel free to ask your followers to sign up for playtests if they fulfill the requirements. Now, no matter which approach you choose, it's important to communicate clearly, concisely, and in easy to understand language when and where these playtests are going to take place, how much time is required to participate, whether players are reimbursed, whether travel and accommodation costs are covered by your company for both the playtester and an assistant, more on this in a bit, and whether both the building and the surrounding area are fully accessible. And this brings us to the next part, important things to consider. Let's start with environmental barriers, because these barriers can prevent people from participating entirely. First, the way to the playtesting site. Is there a parking lot close by? Does the nearest train station have at least one accessible elevator, and is it working properly? Are the sidewalks wheelchair friendly, and are there accessible toilets available on the way? These are all questions you should be able to answer. Next, inspect the space the playtests are supposed to be conducted in. In order to enable as many people as possible to access the building, there should be no mandatory steps or escalators, but elevators that can fit all wheelchairs, including power chairs. All doors need to be wide enough for these type of wheelchairs too, as does the space between furniture and test booths. The same applies to emergency exits. If the entire building is wheelchair accessible except for these exits, you put people's lives in jeopardy. The playtesting space itself should be equipped with height adjustable tables and chairs, as well as a range of different input devices, including assistive devices. Make sure these devices work properly before the playtest starts, because you'll lose precious time and potentially put players in an uncomfortable situation otherwise. In addition, allow players to bring their own devices. It's important for everyone to have access to restrooms. Check the building for accessible toilets and provide information in advance as well as on site, for example with clearly visible signage on how to reach them. If you're conducting several tests at the same time in a closed space, which is usually the case, set up room dividers or soundproof booths to shield players from distractions and overstimulation. Depending on the setup, you may also want to offer optional noise-cancelling headphones. Details such as the room's lighting matter too. LED lights, for example, often flicker noticeably, which can cause discomfort for some people. In addition, very bright light may lead to overstimulation and headaches. Mitigate the risk of infections, for example by wearing masks, using air filters, and allowing players to sign up for one-on-one sessions. Infections can endanger people, especially people with certain chronic illnesses, so do your best to protect them. Kindly ask participants to follow this protocol too, unless discomfort or medical conditions prevent them from wearing masks. And lastly, offer water and light snacks, especially when conducting tests for more than 1 hour. Consider a range of dietary restrictions when planning the catering, or better yet, ask your playtesters in advance. If possible, offer alternatives to on-site playtests, because after all, not everyone is capable of traveling, whether it's due to an impairment, financial restrictions, or personal and professional commitments. One good option are live-streamed play sessions with subsequent online interviews, surveys, or written feedback. An advantage of this approach is that players can play in a familiar, comfortable environment with a setup that works for them. So this is a setting most akin to the actual player experience and will potentially yield the most authentic feedback. A challenge, of course, will be security issues, as it's more difficult to keep players from sharing confidential information, including the build they are testing. So carefully evaluate your options as well as their up and downsides to make an informed decision. And speaking of informed decisions, communicate clearly and early. All of your communication should be as accessible as possible. Use language that is easy to understand, add alt text to images, and ensure that sign-up as well as recruitment screening forms are screen reader compatible and easy to navigate with a range of different devices. Again, provide as much information as possible as early as possible. The date and time, the duration and location of the playtest, and the technical setup. Include a list of accessibility accommodations and the contact information of someone that players can reach out to with questions. Next, provide turn-by-turn directions and consider doing a video guide you can link to if written instructions prove inaccessible. Warn players if your game may still contain photosensitivity triggers, provide detailed information about them if you can, and inform players in advance of potentially sensitive subjects your game touches upon. Finally, always ask players for accommodations they may need and you haven't considered. Next, reimbursement and travel costs. At the very least, you should cover travel costs for each playtester and one accompanying person, for example, an assistant or family member. And if you have the financial means, reimburse your players for their work. It is important to acknowledge that the processes involved in playtest, from traveling to the location to the final feedback stage, are often more time and energy consuming for people with disabilities. People with disabilities are also likely to have less time and energy available throughout the day for work, so 2 hours of playtesting time will take up more space in their work schedule when compared to an able-bodied person. In addition, people with disabilities may face higher costs, for example because they need paid assistance or a shuttle service to your office. This means that in order to fairly compensate them for their efforts, you should generally pay players with disabilities more than those who are not disabled. This is called equitable pay. Create an open feedback culture free of stigmatizing language and discrimination. If a player with a disability offers criticism, do not deflect and dismiss their findings. Do not attribute issues to a disability, but take time to identify the unintentional barriers in your game which actively disable players. If you work with external staff or people from your company who have less experience with accessibility and inclusion, make sure to brief them prior to the playtests. If you don't, there is a high risk of unconscious biases surfacing, and such biases are prevalent in most societies. Also, give players the option to provide their feedback in a variety of formats and styles. Surveys or think-aloud protocols may work well for some, but not for others, especially people with speaking impairments, cognitive impairments, or anxiety. Flexibility is key for inclusion. And finally, we need to bring up documentation. If you're doing interviews to get feedback, offer different ways to communicate. For example, sign language or communication in writing. Make all documents, including legal documents such as NDAs or contractor agreements, as accessible as possible. Once again, this means first and foremost that these texts are screen reader compatible and do not use overly complicated language.